On July 21, 1960, in a quiet New Mexico neighborhood, a 4-year-old girl was playing in the yard. Her name was Sharon Lee Gallegos. She was barefoot, laughing, chasing her cousins through the dirt, her tiny hands scooping up rocks and wildflowers. And then a car pulled up. The doors opened, and in the time it takes to blink, she was gone. Imagine that for a second. One moment she's there, her voice filling the air, her little hands reaching for yours. The next, silence. Sharon's mother called her name. At first, she wasn't worried. Kids wander, right? Maybe she was hiding, maybe she'd run around the corner. But then minutes passed, minutes that stretched into an eternity. Sharon? Sharon, where are you, Mija? Nothing. A mother's heart knows when something is wrong. It's an instinct, sharp as a knife, deep as a wound. And in that moment, Sharon's mother felt it. Her baby was gone, and she wasn't coming back. 10 days later, across state lines, in the brutal Arizona desert, a child's body was found. Tiny, fragile, burned beyond recognition. Her small bones were buried in a shallow grave, the sand barely covering the horror of what had been done to her. She had no name, no identity, no mother to mourn her. The newspapers called her Little Miss Nobody. And just like that, she was forgotten. A lost child in an unmarked grave. A case that faded like desert dust in the wind. But a mother never forgets. A mother doesn't stop looking, doesn't stop praying. She keeps searching, even when the world tells her to move on. And 62 years later, against all odds, Sharon Lee Gallegos got her name back. But knowing her name wasn't enough, because her killers were never found. Somewhere out there, walking free, living normal lives, growing old while Sharon was left to rot in the desert, are the people who took her, who stole her from her mother's arms, who burned a little girl's body and buried her like garbage, who thought that time would erase their sins. But time is cruel. And now, after 6 decades of silence, it's time for answers. Who were they? Why did they take her? And how, in the name of everything good in this world, did they get away with it? This isn't just a story about a missing child. This is a story about stolen innocence, unanswered prayers, and the kind of grief that never stops bleeding. Because Sharon Lee Gallegos was more than a name. She was a daughter, a child, a life that should have been lived. And today, we tell her story. It was the kind of hot, dry summer afternoon where nothing ever happened, where the air smelled of sun-baked pavement and distant cooking fires, where children's laughter filled the neighborhood like background music, blending into the rustling of mesquite trees and the low hum of cicadas. It was July 21st, 1960, in Alamogordo, New Mexico, a small, quiet town, the kind where people trusted their neighbors, where parents let their kids play outside, unsupervised. Because bad things didn't happen here, at least not until that day. The day when a 4-year-old girl named Sharon Lee Gallegos stepped outside to play, and never came home. Sharon was bright, feisty, full of energy. She had big brown eyes, messy dark curls, and a playful smirk that made her look like she was always one step ahead of you. She was the kind of child who made an impression, the type who ran barefoot through the yard, her giggles echoing down the street, her tiny hands always reaching for something new. And on that afternoon, like so many others, she was playing near her grandmother's yard, chasing her cousins, laughing, completely unaware that someone was watching her. It had been seen before, lurking. A dark green car, old and dusty, with 2 strangers inside, a man and a woman. They weren't from Alamogordo. They didn't belong there. But for days they had been circling the neighborhood, watching, waiting. The woman had even spoken to a few people, asking about a little girl, asking about Sharon. No one thought much of it. Not until it was too late. It happened in seconds. One moment, Sharon was playing. The next, a car door swung open. A man stepped out, a shadow stretching across the pavement. A voice, sharp, commanding. "Come here, little girl." Sharon stopped. She knew better. She shook her head, took a step back. Then, before she could run, before she could scream, the man grabbed her. Tiny legs kicked, flailed, little hands clawed at his arms. Her cousins watched in frozen horror as the man lifted Sharon off the ground, her body twisting, thrashing. She was screaming, "Let me go! Let me go!" The woman in the car reached over and yanked the door open. The man threw Sharon inside. Her small frame hit the seat with a thud. The door slammed shut. And then the car peeled away, tires screeching against hot pavement, dust swirling in its wake. And Sharon, she was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. For a long, horrible second, no one moved. Then, screaming. Sharon's cousins ran, their small feet pounding against the ground, their voices high-pitched and panicked. "They took her! They took her!" Doors flew open. Neighbours rushed outside. Sharon's mother, Maria, came running, her heart slamming against her ribs, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Where's Sharon? Where is my baby?" A neighbour grabbed her arm, his face pale. "A car. A green car. They took her." Maria's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the ground, her hands digging into the dirt, her stomach twisting into knots so tight she thought she might vomit. Her baby, her 4-year-old baby, gone. They searched everywhere, the streets, the alleyways, the desert outskirts. But there was nothing. No license plate, no clues. Not a single trace of Sharon's tiny footprints leading away. It was as if she had been erased. And in that moment, a sickening realization settled over the town. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a random crime. They had been watching her. They had come for her. And now, Sharon Lee Gallegos was in a car with strangers, terrified, sobbing, calling for her mother. But no one could hear her. Who were they? Why did they want her? Where were they taking her? And the most horrifying question of all, would anyone ever see Sharon Lee Gallegos alive again? Because as the sun set over Alamogordo that night, one thing was painfully, devastatingly clear. Sharon was out there, somewhere, alone, afraid, and the world had no idea how to find her. The desert doesn't keep secrets for long. It swallows them at first, pulling them deep into the sand, hiding them beneath its ruthless sun. But then it spits them back out. The wind shifts, the earth moves, and one day something terrible is exposed. And on this day, that something was the small, burned body of a child. The man had come to the desert for peace. A simple hike, just him and the open land, escaping the noise of life. But peace was the last thing he found. At first, it didn't seem like much. Just a patch of disturbed earth, a place where the sand lay uneven. Then, a shape. Small. Too small. His stomach tightened. He stepped closer, his boots sinking into the hot ground. And then, he saw it. The charred remains of a little girl. The world tilted. His breath caught in his throat, and for a long moment he couldn't move. The desert had tried to bury its secret. But now the truth was staring right back at him. The investigators arrived fast, sweating, silent, careful. Because even in death, this was still someone's baby. She had been burned, badly. But parts of her were still intact. A pair of sandals, a simple cotton blouse. Her tiny frame, positioned gently, almost carefully, like someone had tried to make it look right, tried to make it seem like she had been put to rest rather than discarded. And that That was almost more terrifying than if she had been tossed aside. Because who does that? Who murders a child and then lays them down like they cared? The sand around her grave was undisturbed. No claw marks, no dragged footprints, no evidence of a desperate struggle to get away. Had she been asleep when they brought her here? Or had she already been gone? The question sat heavy in the air, thick as the desert heat. Because nothing about this made sense. A murderer with a conscience. A child's body burned, yet placed so gently. It was a contradiction, wrapped in horror. And worst of all, it meant her killer wasn't just some reckless monster. They were methodical, they were calculating, and they were still out there. The investigators checked missing persons reports. Nothing. They ran her fingerprints. Nothing. No witnesses. No family coming forward. No one looking for this little girl. She was alone in life. And now, she was alone in death. The thought made the officers sick. Somewhere, someone had to be missing her. Somewhere, there was a mother waiting for a daughter who would never come home. She just didn't know yet. She didn't know that her baby, her sweet, beautiful baby, was already buried beneath the Arizona sun. And if no one claimed her, if no one came forward, then her killer had done more than take her life. They had taken her existence, as if she had never been here at all. Maria Gallegos sat at her kitchen table. The coffee in her cup had long gone cold. She barely noticed. Her eyes stayed fixed on the door, waiting. Because in her heart, Sharon was still out there, still running through the yard, still laughing with her cousins, still alive. But she wasn't. Not anymore. And in the blistering heat of the Arizona desert, police were already writing down the details of a little girl's body. A body they had no name for. A child no one had claimed. A case that was about to go cold. Because whoever had done this, they had been careful, they had been patient, and worst of all, they had gotten away with it. For now. The world moved on. New tragedies replaced old ones. New faces filled the missing persons posters. But in Congress, Arizona, under the scorching desert sun, one little grave never stopped whispering. Who was she? Who had left her there? And why had no one ever come looking for her? The answers had to be out there, somewhere. But time is cruel. Memories fade. Witnesses pass away. And soon the mystery of Little Miss Nobody felt less like an investigation and more like a ghost story. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had proof. Theories sprouted like weeds, each one more desperate than the last. Theory 1. She was a runaway. Maybe she had escaped a violent home and found herself at the mercy of a monster. Maybe she had trusted the wrong person. But a 4-year-old runaway. That didn't sit right. How far could she have gotten? Alone. Theory 2. She was a victim of trafficking. Some believed she had been stolen, sold, used, and then discarded. It would explain why no one reported her missing. Why her tiny body had been burned to erase evidence. But again, there was no proof. Theory 3. She wasn't from here at all. Maybe she had been brought in from another state. Or another country. Maybe that's why no fingerprints, no dental records, no missing persons reports matched her. Theory 4. The drifter killer. A nameless predator. A passing shadow. A man who had no ties, no connections. Who snatched her, took what he wanted, and left her in the dirt. The world had known men like that before. It would know them again. Theory 5. The family secret. The darkest theory of all. What if she had never been reported missing because someone in her own family was responsible? What if they had erased her name on purpose? A secret buried 6 feet deep in the desert. Theories were just shadows on a wall. And without DNA? There was no way to prove anything. 60 years. No name, no justice. 60 years, 6 decades. And in all that time, not a single person had stepped forward to claim her. No mother, no father, no sibling, no one. It was as if she had never existed. And that was the part that haunted people the most. Not just that she had died, but that she had been forgotten. The world had let her disappear. And the question still hung in the air, growing heavier with each passing year. Who was Little Miss Nobody? And would anyone ever find out? For 62 years, she lay in the Arizona desert beneath a headstone that wasn't hers. For 62 years, she was known only as a tragedy, a child without a past, a girl without a name. For 62 years, the world moved on, but she remained frozen in time, buried in a borrowed grave, remembered only by a name that never belonged to her, Little Miss Nobody. But now, science was about to do something that time had failed to do. Give her back her identity. Give her back to the family that had never stopped waiting. In a sterile lab, under the hum of fluorescent lights, a team of forensic scientists took the smallest fragments of her remains. Bone, teeth, the last physical pieces of a child the world had forgotten. And from those fragments, they extracted something that had never faded. Something time could not erase. Her DNA. They fed it into a system that had changed everything. Genetic genealogy. The same technology that had caught the Golden State Killer. The same science that had brought down men who thought they had gotten away with the unthinkable. And now, that same process was being used to do something even greater. To restore a child's name. Her DNA was compared to millions of samples. A single strand of code against an ocean of identities. Until, finally, the match appeared. A name surfaced. A name that should have never been forgotten. A name that had been whispered in grief for 6 decades. Sharon Lee Gallegos. Somewhere in New Mexico, in a home that had long since been filled with other lives, other generations. A family answered the phone. They had carried a wound that never healed. A wound shaped like a 4-year-old girl with dark curls and a laugh too big for her tiny frame. She had been their light, their joy, until the day she was taken. And then the world had given them nothing but silence. The years passed and passed, until the weight of not knowing became heavier than even the worst truth. Then the call came. A voice on the other end of the line. A voice that carried 62 years of waiting. We found her. She was never Little Miss Nobody. She was Sharon. The match was indisputable. The child found in the desert was their Sharon. And suddenly, the weight of the years came crashing down. They had spent a lifetime wondering. Had she been safe somewhere? Had she been waiting to be found? Had she survived? Now they knew. And knowing was unbearable. She had been gone the whole time, lying alone in the desert while the world moved forward without her. Her tiny body buried by strangers. Her name erased from history. Her story reduced to a cold case with no answers. Until now. Now she was no longer a mystery. Now she was no longer just a ghost in old newspaper clippings. She was a daughter, a niece, a sister. She was Sharon Lee Gallegos. For 62 years, the wrong name had marked her grave. For 62 years, strangers had left flowers for a girl they never knew. For 62 years, she had been remembered as a question, not a person. But now, that was about to change. A new stone would be placed, one that didn't belong to a lost soul or an unidentified tragedy. One that carried the truth, one that carried her real name. Because she had never been Little Miss Nobody. She had always been somebody's child. And now, finally, The world would never forget her again. The world finally knew her name. Sharon Lee Gallegos. But the name alone wasn't enough, because the question that haunted her family for 6 decades still had no answer. Who took her? Who stole her away in broad daylight? And worse, who killed her? The woman in the car, a kidnapper in plain sight. The witnesses never forgot what they saw. A dark green car circling the neighborhood, again and again. Inside, a man and a woman, watching, waiting. The woman was well dressed, elegant, out of place. Not the image of a predator lurking in the shadows. But sometimes monsters wear silk and pearls. This wasn't a random crime. This was calculated, deliberate. Was the woman the mastermind? Did she need a child, a stolen daughter to replace something missing in her own life? Or was she simply a decoy, luring Sharon closer, offering kindness before the cruelty? Nobody knows. And worse, nobody may ever know. The Arizona desert was a brutal place to die. Sharon's remains were found in a shallow grave, her small body badly burned. The fire had erased fingerprints, destroyed evidence. But why? Why go through the effort of abducting a child only to burn her body days later? Was this a ransom attempt gone horribly wrong? Did the kidnappers panic? Was Sharon too defiant, too brave? Or was this something darker, a crime committed with the full intention of silencing her forever? Her tiny frame was found carefully positioned, not tossed away like trash, but placed. There was no sign of a struggle at the burial site, no evidence she was killed there. Which means, whoever did this held her somewhere else. She had been alive, trapped, waiting, before the final, unthinkable act. And then they tried to erase her, to make sure no one would ever know her name. But fire couldn't destroy what was left behind, not her DNA, not the truth, not the need for justice. As the years passed, theories emerged. Some believed she was taken by a drifter, a stranger passing through. But that theory never fit. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't chaotic. This was a plan. A car stalking her neighborhood for days. A woman inside, possibly gaining her trust. And then, the grab, the snatch, the car speeding away. Some investigators suspected her own family. Because, statistically, most child abductions involve someone the victim knows. But there was no evidence, no DNA, no proof. And then, there was the biggest question of all. If the crime was committed by a stranger, how did they know where to find her? Why Sharon? Why that day, that moment? Did someone tip them off? Or had they been watching her for far longer than anyone knew? 62 years later, the truth about her killers remains buried in time. Whoever took her, they lived their lives. They aged. They laughed. They celebrated birthdays. They grew old while Sharon never had the chance to. They were never arrested, never punished, never forced to answer for the horror they inflicted on a 4-year-old child. And today, they might be long dead, or worse, they might still be out there, somewhere, living with the knowledge that they stole a little girl's life and got away with it. Sharon Lee Gallegos finally has her name back. But her story isn't finished, because there is one last truth that still needs to be found. Who stole her away that day? Who held her captive? Who set fire to her tiny body and left her alone in the desert? And perhaps the most painful question of all, why? This isn't just a crime story. This is a mother's nightmare. A child snatched in broad daylight. A family left in the dark for decades. And killers who walked free. For 6 decades, she was nothing but a whisper in the desert. A tiny body in a shallow grave. A nameless child, burned and buried, her identity stripped away as if she had never existed. They called her Little Miss Nobody. But she was somebody. She was Sharon Lee Gallegos. She was 4 years old, She had a family who loved her, a life that should have stretched out before her. And yet, someone stole it away. Her case should have been lost to time. But time didn't win. Science didn't forget her. The people who refused to let her fade into history, they didn't forget her. And today, neither will we. But even with her name restored, her story isn't over. Because the people who took her, whoever they were, walked away. They lived, they grew old, and they were never held accountable. That is the final injustice. Her name is known, her story is told, but the hardest questions, they remain unanswered. Who was the woman in the car? Why did they target Sharon? Why did they burn her body? Was it panic, or something even darker? And most of all, who did this? And where are they now? Maybe they're dead. Maybe they were never caught because they slipped away into time. Or maybe, just maybe, someone out there still knows something. A child was stolen. Her family waited 62 years for the truth. They shouldn't have to wait forever for justice. If you found this story heartbreaking, infuriating, unforgettable, don't let Sharon's story end here. Every like, every comment, every share keeps cases like hers alive. Justice doesn't have an expiration date, and neither does the truth. For over 6 decades, she was just a name on a headstone. But today, we know who she was. What we don't know is who took her and why. Maybe someday those answers will come. Until then, she will not be forgotten. Sharon Lee Gallegos will never be just Little Miss Nobody again.